Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Tina McAndrew. I'm the director of the Randall Library here in Stow. And I'm glad to be here tonight for our second in a series of climate talks in collaboration with Sustainable Stow. And we're very glad to host Senator Jamie Eldridge tonight to talk about new laws that are going to come into effect with Governor Baker. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Sharon to say a few words.
And I'm going to pass it on to Barbara Clancy.
Okay.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is the second in a series of talks that we will be having on climate change in our communities. I just wanted to say a little bit about Sustainable Stow. We're a group that brings residents together to work on positive actions around climate change and energy consumption and to build a greener and more resilient community. And this speaker series is still a work in progress. We're planning on third Wednesdays of the month if we can. We did second Wednesdays tonight because we have a busy and guest that we really did want to talk to tonight, Senator Jamie Eldridge. But we're hoping to focus on some issues like water, green and energy efficient construction, landscaping for climate and climate resiliency and other topics. So just check us out. We have a column in the Stow Independent called The Green Corner that comes out once a month that will be highlighting upcoming talks. We also have a Facebook group and you can check out our website, sustainablestow.org. And I'm going to pass it over to Rick.
You're on mute.
The impetus for this session and this whole series, in one sense, was the fact that the State House, the Senate, and the House have been passing some very significant climate legislation. And that legislation predicts some serious changes that towns and citizens need to be prepared to make. And many of us haven't really begun to figure that out yet. I first met Senator Eldridge, I don't know, a few years after I returned to this area, probably 10, 12, 13 years ago. He was running a series of programs out of Acton High School. He was our senator then. And he was, what I remember, faulty memory might be here, but that he would bring on people from various towns in his district who were talking about the things they were doing.
Adam, interesting thing to just come and take a look at what's here. Oops.
You're live, Sharon.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was begging your pardon. Thought I was muted
right now.
Yes, I see that. Okay, let me just, whoops.
So, that was where I heard about what other towns, like at the time, Harvard and maybe Acton or other towns were doing relative to
I've now lost them.
Putting in solar cells and other work. Later, we began with Arnie's work to create an effort, which was the beginning of Sustainable Stow, to put solar cells on the roofs of houses, which was a very successful campaign in Stow. And then just a couple of years ago, we did another campaign on heat pumps. Well, so now it's like we need to work more. We've got a lot of work to do, and we need to look to the leadership of people like Senator Eldridge, who's working on, okay, how do we implement this? He works on many areas, as you may know. He's been very involved in environmental justice. He's been very involved in climate legislation. He's been very involved in ethics reform. So he's doing a lot of good work in a lot of sectors. But at least for tonight, we're going to be looking to him for, so what do we need to be thinking about relative to what's happening on Beacon Hill and the climate work we have ahead of us here in Stow? So thank you, Senator Eldridge, for joining us tonight.
Great. Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you to Sharon and Barbara and obviously see Alan here and Arnie and Carol and Sustainable Stow in general. Thank you so much. Great for you to do these climate talks, and great for Stow TV to be involved in the Randall Library. And yeah, I will say, Rick, talking about, and just, that sort of entity back then that you may have gone to some meetings early in my Senate career was called the Green Advisory Council, so the GAC. And I sort of gathered climate change activists, environmentalists from across the 14 communities I represented. And of course, we were passing climate change legislation back then, including the Green Communities Act and the Global Warming Solutions Act in 2008. But I will say that just the level of activism has just increased dramatically, both in the Senate district and across the state. And, I've met with many of you, including at the State House, on leading up to the legislation that turned out to be the next generation roadmap law, which passed last session. And then after Governor Baker essentially vetoed it, we brought it back and passed it into law just 2 months ago. So first, I just want to thank everyone here, and just, so many people in Stow who advocated so strongly for this bill, including, of course, Sustainable Stow, but also, Elders for Climate Action. So really appreciate that. And in terms of the next generation roadmap, obviously the big focus was on the 2050 net zero energy goal to reduce our carbon emissions. And now the climate plan that the Baker-Polito administration is putting together, and they're still working on it. So there's still opportunities to comment on it. But I was very pleased in the law to see about 6 of the bills that I have filed that are now part of the law. So that includes environmental justice, which I think is, really from what's happened over the past year around racial justice, making sure that every community benefits from our clean energy laws, and that, vulnerable populations don't disproportionately bear the impact of climate change, which is still the case in Massachusetts and across the country and across the world. The nature-based solutions, which trying to sort of revive in some ways the Green Advisory Council. I did a webinar about a month ago that I know some of you attended on nature-based solutions, which is, basically the ability to reward communities, nonprofits, et cetera, that are protecting open space, protecting trees, grass, or ecology, because of how that's taking in carbon, and getting the state government to recognize that and reward communities that are looking to do that. Stow obviously, has just done tremendous work, throughout the history of protecting open space, but actually the state rewarding communities for those actions. Low income solar, community solar, again, those equity issues, really pleased that that's in there. Dramatically increasing not only offshore wind, but solar. So that was absolutely critical. Some measures around gas safety and moving away from our reliance on natural gas and other fossil fuels, obviously. And a number of other bills that I filed that was pleased to see in the law. So many bills in this final law. And so, I think one of the questions was, sort of how is what is the process for sort of taking this law and then making sure that it's properly implemented. So there are some deadlines that are coming up, and I think that's really right now where the focus is what can we do to make sure that we're holding the administration's feet to the fire on these bills, on this law, and making sure that every entity from the DPU to DP are making sure that we fully implement the next generation roadmap law. So just want to highlight a few areas. I'm just calling up some of my documents here. So just so people have a sense of what's sort of just moving forward right now in terms of the next generation roadmap law, some dates to think about. And again, I'll be the first to say that, there are some challenges of, how do you get communities, even in some ways legislators, to continue to advocate to make sure the Baker-Polito administration is taking the action to get to net zero energy emissions by 2050. So I don't have the answers, but I think it's the continued persistence and activism that continues to happen with climate change activists. But just some deadlines that are coming up. By July 15th, Energy and Environmental Secretary Catherine Theorides must set a first ever greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal for a program sponsored by Mass Save, the home energy efficiency program. By New Year's Day of 2022, the DPU must have transferred $12 million to new funds to the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, the Mass CEC, for a workforce training program based on focus on clean energy. Mass CEC has piloted a number of solar projects in the district I represent. Very proud of that. How do we make sure, and this sort of speaks to the Green New Deal, of moving away from fossil fuel jobs to clean energy jobs, and the Mass CEC plays a real critical role in that. By July 1st, 2022, the EEA Secretary Theorides must have adopted emission limits and sublimits for 2025. And that was a really critical piece of the law that I really give credit to Senator Barrett on, the Senate chair of the Telecommunications Utility and Energy Committee, is not just saying, okay, see you in 2050, see you in 2040, hope the emissions reductions is aggressively pursued. But he really insisted and was successful that this review and the emissions goals is every 5 years to make sure that actions are happening now to reach those emissions goals. So that's what that date speaks to for next year. By next December 2022, the Department of Energy Resources must have developed and promulgated a new specialized stretch energy code. So above and beyond the current Green Communities Act stretch energy code. So that will create an option for cities and towns to adopt. Governor Baker, has an opportunity to fill vacancies and have appointments in a number of boards, including the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, which speaks to that green building code. Creating an action plan for low-income solar and community solar, again, to make sure that those environmental justice communities also benefit from not only our goals, but quite honestly, our taxpayer dollars that all of us, pay. So those are some of the dates that are coming up. I'd be the first to say that it's not just about, okay, Baker-Polito administration or, successor governors about, implementation, but it continues to be a work of progress of all of us coming together and continuing to push. And so I have filed a number of bills that I hope will, move the bar forward. I'm happy to talk about those a little later, but just, I think right now there's a little bit of a breather from passing this bill into law that Governor Baker vetoed. These deadlines are coming up. The TUE, the Telecommunications Utility and Energy Committee, today had an oversight hearing. So, asking some of these questions. Senator Barrett, the continued chair, continues to focus on that. The Senate Global Warming Committee had an oversight hearing yesterday on are we going to meet our goals to move to a certain number of electric vehicles. So that's another goal that we need to meet to truly reduce carbon emissions. So I think I'll stop right now, and I'm happy to take questions. I'll be the first to say that, as someone that has dedicated really my entire career to combating climate change and embracing clean energy, and maybe this is for all of us, it's just a very complex area. I'm learning each and every day, but it is very complex, and I might not have every answer, but looking forward to any questions. And then I'm certainly happy to highlight some of the bills that I've filed to move the ball forward, including a more aggressive goals to reduce carbon emissions, the IPCC 2030 bill, which, again, will keep up the pressure on the Baker-Polito administration to meet its emissions goals. So thanks again for having me, and happy to take any questions.
It over to those who want to ask you a question. I just, our whole thought, you were just talking, it was a great summary of what's happening at the state level. I think part of our whole motivation for this series was, okay, the town has 9 years to make the 2030 goals, right? I mean, it's only, it's got its piece of the puzzle too. And one of the reasons why we don't have as many people here tonight as we would is because there's a group that's reviewing a new building project, a new potential housing project and stuff. There's several of those coming at the town right now. And so we go, hey, are those builders considering putting in heat pumps from the beginning as opposed to fossil fuels? I mean, and the answer so far is, well, we don't know. They're not talking about that. It's like, okay, so no, we don't have a building code like some other towns have been trying to put in place. But it's like, wouldn't it make sense to start there now? If you're going to put in a new housing, these are dozens and dozens of units. There's various stories about how many units. But many of them would have to be converted again, in theory, by the end of the decade. It's like, anyway.
Right.
But we need more education around that.
Absolutely. I will say, and again, the vast majority of the communities I represent, are starting to take action to combat climate change. My hometown of Acton, and some of you may have followed this, but when we approved last year a new fire station and a new twin elementary school construction, that is going to be powered. The schools will be powered by geothermal and solar. So, I've seen them drill the holes for geothermal for that elementary school, and the fire station will be largely powered by solar. And so that is related to one of the bills that I filed, and this is a statewide local option bill, Senate 1333, an act to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by permitting local option all electric buildings and home ordinances. So it would basically allow a city or town at town meeting, or if you're a city council, to state that all new buildings, whether homes or commercial, must be all electric and not be powered by fossil fuels, and therefore, prohibiting the expansion of natural gas pipelines or other fossil fuel infrastructure. So that's a bill that I filed working with Representative Tammy Gouveia and Representative Danilo Senna, the state representatives for Acton. So I think that kind of speaks to that discussion that's, I guess, happening right now in Stow, is a lot of these actions can happen at the local level. So I'm glad that Stow is doing what it's doing and having those discussions.
I see Sharon has her hand up. Sharon Shapilla.
Yes, thank you. Senator Eldridge, very nice to be here. I am not one of your constituents, but I am one of your admirers. And I have a question. I am a climate activist in Bolton, and am on the climate action subcommittee of our master plan. And I have a real question about how the new stretch code is going to evolve. It's not at all clear to me whether we are a green community, but I know that we have been exempted from the requirement of being a green community, which is to accept a stretch code as soon as it's settled. And I've been reading in the Mass Climate Action Network website that there are all kinds of arguments happening in communities about how and when this stretch code will go into effect.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the great question, and not certain exactly whether it's the case for Stow, but the part of the law is that by next year, by the end of next year, so end of 2022, Department of Energy Resources, has to have developed this specialized stretch energy code. So, there'll be opportunities for comment. I will say this is an example, and I'm proud that the Senate took the lead on this, is that with all due respect to the Board of Building Standards, Building Regulations and Standards, a number of the appointees there, quite honestly, in my opinion, influenced by developers, were loath to adopt a stronger green energy code. And so that's why this specialized stretch energy code is now under DOER and not the Board of Building Regulations and Standards. So being more environmentally minded. So now again, this is creating this code, but a city or town must adopt it on its own. So I would hope that Stow would consider that. And, I also have no doubt that developers, will be attending hearings to oppose. So we need to make sure that, all of our climate change activists and concerned residents are weighing in as well, because this is an area where, unfortunately, I've had a lot of frustration with the Baker-Polito administration that at the end of the day, siding with developers against, climate change, environmental protection, other issues. So really have to be vigilant on this, but it's a great question. And, I think there's a partial solution in the law, but, it is going to take some time.
Let me just follow up a bit on this. What I've been hearing is that there is something in the law, and I don't know if this is correct, that will require retrofitting if buildings are not net zero. Is that aspirational, or is it actually in the law?
I do not know that. I'm not sure about that. So I will check that and I'll get back to you about that. Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have a large apartment complex that's being proposed in Bolton, and these folks actually are quite willing to do. They're all electric because we don't have gas in Bolton, and so they're prepared to be actually pretty energy efficient, but they do not know anything about the stretch code, and they won't be breaking ground for probably a couple of years. It might take that long.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not we can actually, it makes sense to start talking about the stretch code or a net zero stretch code at this point in town. Because we could, as I understand what you were saying, is we could adopt it at this point.
Well, it will be developed by the end of next year. So there is nothing to adopt now.
Okay. So there's nothing. Okay. So we can't work on that.
Right. Other than the current standard Green Communities Act stretch energy code, but this is a specialized one, but it'll be done at the end of next year. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Arnie has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Eldridge. And yeah, I just wanted to mention the bill that you filed on allowing communities to adopt an ordinance to require new construction to be all electric or fossil fuel free is one that we've adopted within Eldridge Climate Action as one of our highest priority bills. We think so. Great. We really want to see that one get through, because there's a lot of communities that have tried to do that. We know that that state law doesn't yet allow an individual community
Right.
to do that. So thank you for filing that bill. But we are in this period, and I think you mentioned that we're in sort of this breather period. Here's where we've passed the law, which was terrific, and we know the law has very even without the 2025 target in place, we know the 2030 target, by itself is I think pretty aggressive. And from the draft Clean Energy and Climate Plan that was released by the administration, they're calling for, I think really aggressive, particularly in the building and transportation sector, and in a town like Stow, that pretty much that's it for emissions, is half buildings and half transportation. And as Rick was saying, we're faced with 3 developments that are in different stages right now in Stow that could result in, well over 300 new housing units. For a town like Stow, that's a significant addition. And we've been talking to the planning board, the town administrator, our select board. Will be actually talking to the developer for one of those projects tomorrow. But we really are looking for leverage of some sort to try to encourage these developers to adopt a tight thermal enclosure and make these new housing units all electric. We can point to the bill that's been passed and say these are the targets. We can point to the draft CECP and say, this is what they're calling for 2030 in the building sector, for example. But we don't have what I have been looking for, something that that we can look for from the state directly, someone who would sort of have our back, if you will, to say, this would be foolish to build 300 new housing units in a small town like Stow, when what we're really trying with fossil fuels, when what we really need to do is reduce emissions in the building sector by 50% in the next 10 years. So I'm just looking for your thoughts on, what type of leverage, how can I have been trying to reach out to the various agencies and boards and committees in the state for someone to sort of have our back on this. And so far, I haven't been successful. So would like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Arnie. I'd be the first to say it's a difficult question. I mean, as all these different state agencies, the administration in general is, interpreting what the legislature passed, at least at this point, they're probably, reluctant to really weigh in and, are trying to finalize the climate action plan for the state. So I don't know if it environmental organization like, the Conservation Law Foundation, could provide some guidance, or, happy to, try to set up meetings with some of the key officials, of EA or DOER or DPU. But, I will say around the building standards and building code, there was a real battle. Just as an example of the power of, the real estate industry, is that a bill that one of my colleagues, Senator Eric Lesser, had filed for many years, just to put an energy score for every home, about how energy efficient or inefficient, the home was, so that, prospective buyers could look at that and therefore, apply some pressure, I guess, in some ways of the free market to get, homeowners to make their homes more energy efficient. And the real estate industry, strongly opposed that, and that was not in the law. So yeah, so I'll sort of like Sharon's question, I'll have to do some follow-up on that. I do feel the Conservation Law Foundation, which has, been very comfortable to sue the administration on multiple issues. But they might be a good resource to provide some guidance. So happy to set up a meeting if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And you mentioned, for example, EEA and Secretary Theorides. Are you aware whether she or anyone in her department has an outreach, type of function that, could support a town like Stow in their efforts to encourage energy efficient development, before we actually have the regulations or law in place to really push that issue?
It might be the regional staff for the Department of Energy Resources, that does a lot of the work around Green Communities Act. So, I can reach out to the regional liaison and, arrange a meeting about that. And sort of related, just because, I think it speaks to how do you build this infrastructure as far as staff and enforcement is the town of Acton did just hire a sustainability director. So, the town of Acton now has a sustainability director. And so she is actively working on Acton's, climate plan and, also the banning the fossil fuel infrastructure effort, which I think will be a home rule petition also coming from Acton, separate from the statewide bill we filed. So, there was a bill I filed many years ago with this vision that every single community should have an energy efficiency manager or sustainability director, to guide a lot of this and sort of work across different town departments to come up with a firm plan to combat climate change. So I just mention that because, again, at the end of the day, and this is something that Senator Barrett has been very, very specific at, and I think Alan Fierce had called me about this a couple of weeks ago, and I'm pleased to say that in the Senate budget is a specific requirement that these environmental agencies will have to hire employees to implement the next generation roadmap law. And the reality is, unless you have more staff, it's either not going to be done as quickly or it never gets done. So I'm really happy that the Senate budget, which just came out yesterday, is devoting millions of dollars to hire more employees to fully implement the next generation roadmap law. Thanks, Artie.
Just to follow up on what Arnie was saying, we were, when we did our Heat Smart program here in Stow, we were fortunate that there was a pilot, although we had a lot of, it was, there's strengths and weaknesses to this pilot called the MVP, but it was for contractors. It was to incentivize contractors to do things like insulation, and we could leverage that as part of our effort. That was a pilot program. It's no longer in operation. I wonder if because one of the big issues that's really happening with our development is our contractors or our builders are very concerned about costs. So while there's some studies that says that if you build all electric, it's cheaper than building with fossil fuel for air conditioning and heating. However, if you also do extensive insulation for thermo, that the costs may go up. So one of the things about construction is, the builders are real concerned about costs and margins and that type of stuff. And now all of a sudden, with all the prices going up with material, it's also becoming concern. But if a program was there that sort of incentivized them to do energy efficiency, that might help them with the cost issue. So I don't know if there was any bill, if there's anything that's happening with CEC or anything like that, that would again help the construction industry in terms of doing the right thing.
Mhm. Yeah, that's such a great point because unfortunately, the mass home builders and NIOP, often just oppose, anything that's bold around combating climate change, and they use the argument, which I think is a false one, is that well, we're trying to deliver quote unquote affordable housing, and this will just increase costs. So I do think to your point about what agencies can provide more guidance to developers. I think that is a real critical piece that's been missing. I think that, respectfully, the Baker-Polito administration has just taken the developers, at their word and haven't really worked on changing that. And that's where, maybe Mass CEC, the Clean Energy Center, with that money being invested to hire more people, is part of that should be training for developers that it is possible to build actually very affordable homes that are 100% renewable energy. And I know that some developers are doing that, but they tend to be just a few. But that's maybe something the Mass CEC could take on, or whether that's some of the major climate change groups, perhaps Environmental League of Massachusetts, which has a little bit more of a corporate sponsorship model. Maybe they're the right entity to do that kind of outreach. But I just shake my head when you see these major developments literally happening, at the harbor, the Boston Harbor, or right next to the Atlantic Ocean, with no real plan. The fact that that area will likely be flooded in 10, 20 years.
Right.
So the power of the developers, and that really has to change. So that's the best I can answer for you. So
Understand.
mhm.
Alan, you're on mute. You're still on mute. Alan, can you get off mute? Did you want to say something? Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Hello.
I'm sorry. I was on another screen. I'm sorry, Jamie, and I was actually looking at the Senate Ways and Means Committee budget. I got very excited when you said there might be millions for hiring employees at EEA, and I just looked. It looks like it's $480,000. Now
That's in the current budget, but I'm cautiously optimistic there'll be some amendments added. So.
Oh, well, that's what I was wondering, because as a former state employee and a manager, I knew that when you added all the benefits and retirement and everything, at least $100,000 per employee was the figure I had in my head 10 years ago. And now it's probably higher than that. So this might be 4 or 5 employees at EEA, which doesn't seem to be enough to me. But it's a great start. I hope there is some additional money. I haven't looked at the amendments yet, but I will be doing that. And, in addition to employees, of course, there needs to be money to implement programs. We were talking about housing and transportation. The transportation numbers are very aggressive in terms of what we need to do with electric vehicles. I did listen into that hearing yesterday. But clearly part of it is going to have to be additional incentives for drivers. And, we've had an incentive program for years, and it's only stimulated a very small number of EV purchases. It's done a good job. but we really need to ramp that up, and it's probably going to take a higher incentive, and many millions of dollars are going to be needed in the budget for programs like that, and that's just one program. So, I'm hoping that the Senate will really keep their eye on this. Time is so short between now and 2030. It's only about 9.5 years to the December 31st of 2030. So we really need to be moving very quickly, on programs like EVs in order to meet that goal. And I as a lawyer, I continue to almost have nightmares over the fact that these targets are enforceable. We learned this from the Kane decision by the SJC, and I am just so worried that we're going to get to, well, maybe even 2025. We haven't set that limit yet, but certainly 2030, and we're not going to make it, and all kinds of litigation is going to break out, and who the hell knows what's going to happen then. So I'm really hopeful that the legislature gets the message that we really need some significant funding here to implement this program. So I don't really have a question. It's just to continue to encourage you, to encourage your colleagues, to put the pedal to the metal here on funding implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you're reaching out to me several weeks ago and heard from a number of other climate activists across the district about, with the House budget, not including, funding to implement the next generation roadmap law, was the Senate going to? So 400,000, good start, but you're right, not enough. So I hope some amendments that I assume Senator Barrett will be filing will be accepted. I do want to mention that, you have, to his credit, Governor Baker's Transportation Climate Initiative, TCI, which, will raise some revenues by putting a price on carbon from transportation. So making sure that money can be used for programming and staff. And then I will mention, just because this is something that could directly help cities and towns, is that I've filed the bill, the HERO Coalition bill, the Housing Environment Revenue Options, and it would double the deeds excise fee. So when someone buys a house, and it would raise about $300 million. Half of that would go to affordable housing, and half of it would go to climate resiliency. So direct grants to cities and towns. And so that could be a model, for Stow to get some funding, and obviously other communities. So I filed that bill because I think the reality is unless you have a dedicated revenue source, as you well know, working at the DEP, it's just less likely for things to get fully implemented or programs to be truly robust. So a lot of work to be done on that. Thanks, Alan.
So since we're talking about transportation, the question I have, EVs are one thing, school buses and other vehicles are another. And the question is, are any of the bill, I'm just ignorant, I apologize because I haven't done my homework, but are there any of the bills for revenue or grants or something to help towns buy things like electric school buses and support, town vehicles going electric?
Yeah, the Green Communities Act has provided some funding for that. I believe the town of Concord got electric school buses, and Acton was supposed to, but it didn't turn out. But that's a revenue source that we all pay, or many communities pay on their electric bill. And I personally would like to think that the TCI, Transportation Climate Initiative, would provide some revenue to cities and towns. But I think absolutely we need to look at other sources of revenue. That's why I filed the HERO bill. And again, I think about what Acton did with the Green Communities Act funding several years ago is they hired someone that some of you may know, Kate Crosby, who is the energy efficiency manager for the Acton Boxborough Regional School District. And so she, in her first year on a fairly modest salary, reduced the energy costs for the whole school district by over $300,000. And so she continues to do great work around reducing energy costs, moving to a compost system that's really reduced the trash and the trash contract costs for the school district. And now, at least in my opinion, it led to Acton, hiring the sustainability director who just started a few weeks ago, named Andrea Becerra, who I just met with this week, who is now helping implement Acton's climate action plan. So there definitely needs to be more state funding, but I think it's also about what cities and towns can do with local revenue too. But great question.
That's a great summary of what Kate's impact has been. I hadn't heard that story. That's a good one.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, no. And I think that, really now what's happened, I really think since the past 4 or 5 years is that now the just expectation is every session for us to pass climate change and clean energy legislation. I'm sure a lot of you saw that the federal government finally gave approval to the offshore winds off of coast of Massachusetts. As Senator Markey, I think often says, Massachusetts is the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind. We have the best siting for it in the country. That's really encouraging. So there are already bills to increase the kilowatt hours for offshore wind for contracts with utilities. And, there's just more and more bills that are filed every session. So, I think for this session, obviously I mentioned some of the bills that I filed, hoping they pass into law, but there's many, many others as well. And especially ones that get into transportation equity and how to truly create environmentally just policies. I did want to mention, I have refiled my Enact increasing rooftop solar energy, which, speaking to the building codes, would require that any new building or any rehabilitation to a building or home, that the roofs would have to be solar ready. So, that's part of how we get to dramatically increasing solar power throughout Massachusetts, is making sure there's not that barrier for new homes or rehab homes, that they don't have to do extra work to make them compatible for solar panels. So we're hoping that bill passes, and I would argue that's a jobs bill as well, as far as, the more solar jobs. So.
All right.
Any other questions?
Alan and Sharon both have their hands up. Oh, and Barbara too. Well, Barbara, why don't you ask a question? You're first. You're on mute.
This is a little general. I was surprised to learn that the largest caucus in the legislature this session is the Food Systems Caucus. And because I think like food in some ways is also having a moment.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if there's discussion within that caucus or within the legislators who are interested in climate issues and environmental issues about sort of greening the local food system or supporting local agriculture in a way that would be beneficial to climate. And that might be good.
Yeah, Barbara, that's such a great question. And the I'm a member of the Food System Caucus, perhaps every legislator is. And though I'm not always the most bipartisan legislator, dare I say, I am really happy that the Food System Caucus is very, very bipartisan. I think there's been a very strong bipartisan commitment to addressing food insecurity, hunger issues, and supporting, farms. And so, what we did see for investments this past year because of the pandemic is food infrastructure grants. So, Open Table, which serves the Maynard, Stow, Sudbury area, they got a food infrastructure grant to actually, provide more food, through, churches and nonprofits and public housing throughout the region. So that was a great example. The Healthy Incentive Program, HIP, which provides money to farmers to provide, healthy, nutritious food at food pantries. So that was a focus. And I think, definitely one of the clear focuses is sustainability and making sure that every community has local food and less, food coming from, other states, other countries. So I think that is, a growing interest. And I think there is a growth of farms across Massachusetts, which is great to see. And the Food System Caucus has just been very effective at, connecting that to, very basic needs that the people have. So I will definitely raise, that issue at the next caucus meeting about that connection to reducing, carbon footprint and making sure every community is sustainable. And yeah, it's been a very, very active caucus, which has been great to see.
So Sharon's had her hand up for a bit. I think that, and then Alan.
Okay. Jamie, just the name or number of your bill about the new buildings and with the solar ready rooftops?
Oh, sure. Yep. It's Senate 2156, an act increasing rooftop solar energy.
Thank you very much. That's a great, that's going to be really good. And I'll talk to our senator to talk to you.
Yes, that's Senator John Cronin, right?
Yes. Yeah.
He's a great addition to the Senate. Yep. We were together at the finally the opening of the Devon's Regional Vaccination Clinic, which does cover Stow at Bolton, and looking to get more people to get vaccinated there from the region. So it was great to finally open that this morning out in Devon's.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alan, you had a question? Or Arnie too?
Yeah, I'd like to maybe shift gears a little bit. We could probably talk all night about climate related issues. But I actually had a couple of other areas I wanted to touch on. One of the things not mentioned in the expansive, or not terribly expansive introduction of Jamie is if we did the full intro, we would have used up all the meeting time. But he was the chair of something called the Water Infrastructure Study Commission a few years back. And it's, because I'm involved with ORS, it's something we've been, very concerned with over the years, making sure particularly the wastewater treatment plants are able to keep up with the evolving science and technology. I don't want to get into that. It's too technical, but one of the water issues that we're facing right here in Stow, and it's a serious one, is PFAS.
Oh, yes.
And so I have a couple of related questions. One is that in the last session, I think Senator Hogan backed this a bill that I think was passed to set up a PFAS task force.
That's right. It was passed into law. Yep.
Maybe you can give us an update on what the status of that is. But more directly, what do you see happening for towns like Stow that have a serious contamination problem around the center of our city with PFAS?
Absolutely. And it's just a real, approaching a crisis. It's, I think, in almost every community. I represent some of my towns, which had a much higher appearance of PFAS, mostly related to being more industrial, like Ayer and Hudson. They've had to build, new treatment plants to filter out PFAS. So, certainly hoping that at the federal level, and I will give a lot of credit to Congresswoman Lori Trahan, as she's really focused on water infrastructure and PFAS and sewer infrastructure. So hopefully this infrastructure bill that President Biden has proposed will provide more funding for that. I do think we need to be much bolder on banning PFAS from all consumer products. It's just so disturbing that it's still in, almost every household item, in terms of, wrappers and bags and things connected to food. So those are a number of bills that I've co-sponsored this session. And directly to your question, Alan, is Representative Hogan, she led the effort to pass this PFAS task force. I don't actually know if it's met yet. I'm actually going to reach out to her. And I believe that she's on it and might be co-chairing it, but really critical. And then of course, DEP has taken action on that, but we need to ban it from all products as well. So that's a big issue we need to take on as well this session.
Great, I appreciate that. I'm going to throw in a quick question before I cut off here. Any chance this year for the no net loss bill?
Yes, it actually, so this is the Public Land Preservation Act, also known as the no net loss bill, to basically create a higher standard in law for towns and cities that are looking to sell or transfer, develop municipal land. So the hearing is actually in a week, and Representative Balzer and I have refiled that, and it did pass, I think, sort of in the midnight hour at the end of session last year in the House. There wasn't enough time to pass in the Senate, but I actually am truly optimistic we can pass that bill. And I always try to remind people is, we need to pass the traditional environmental, open space legislation, as well as the climate change legislation. So I'm hopeful we can pass that this session, and really appreciate your strong support for that.
Great, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
So Martin Brower just sent his thanks, and he had to leave. I think we should probably wind it up. I wanted to just mention that since Stow is a town that relies on individual private wells, we have a different PFAS problem. And we are sort of, some of us anyways, are looking to the legislation that might enable a town like Stow to provide guidance, however you want to put that, to homeowners in a drought situation about how they use the water from their well on their town, since we're all from one aquifer or several aquifers. It gets technical there, but and we have no way of saying, no, please don't water your lawn with your sprinklers right now. We're in a drought situation.
Mm-hmm.
So some of us are interested in seeing that bill move forward.
Yes, and so I have filed the drought bill that would cover private wells. So Representative Carolyn Dyker and I have filed that, and she's now the House Chair of the Environment Committee. So we're hoping that gets some momentum this session as well.
We're going to try and give it a little bit of spotlight here, I think.
That's great. Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Arnie's got his hand up.
Yeah, if I could, thank you. I know we're at time, but I did have another sort of related question to the relationship between the state and local communities. We've in Stow, Sharon, I think, talked about some of the initiatives we've done over the years, and we're a green community. And generally, the town is pretty supportive of the work that we've been doing. And we think now is the time for our town to develop its own climate action plan. I know a lot of the towns that you represent already have climate action plans in place. But we thought that, with the passage of this new climate bill and the targets that it's put in place, that Stow and other communities should think about, how can we support, how can we make sure that the contribution we make is supportive of the statewide targets, both overall and on a sector basis. So we're thinking of the climate action plan in those terms. The one thing that I don't know, and I'm not aware of, is any sort of relationship between the town's statewide goals, either overall or on a sector basis, and an individual community's goals and an individual community's climate action plan. And I don't know if there's any thought that you have about how those two could somehow be, synchronized to give what's being done at a local level, more traction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And my guess is that, quite honestly, there's no real direct connection, in the sense that it may be at this point too difficult for the state to be putting together its final plan and, intersecting that with, 351 cities and towns. But I don't know if this is something where the regional planning agencies, so for our region, for the most part, MAPC, if they can sort of, bring all those together to say, okay, this is the projected impact of cities and towns climate action plans. So that's something I can ask MAPC, which is doing, just great work on climate change, and often, economies of scale can help with that.
Yeah, they actually worked with us to do a townwide greenhouse gas inventory last year. That was terrific.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And so we've been in touch with them, and I know they have their own, net zero program that they provide some support for local communities to develop a climate action plan. But again, it would be good to see somehow some correlation or relationship between, how, an individual community or region could adopt a plan that, would be in sync with the state's goals, and somehow some sort of oversight that, could be, perhaps, I don't know, at a state or regional level, to look at communities and maybe have communities compete with each other, something like that. I'm really just asking the question now, because I know a lot of the towns you represent already have those plans in place, but they don't really have, as far as I'm aware, a way to enforce those targets, or, ensure that they're in sync with the overall state targets. So.
Right. Yeah, well said. Yeah, but yeah, my guess is that there won't be much intersection between the state and cities and towns. It would be too much work. So.
Well, we should let you go. Thank you very much for spending some time with us tonight. It'll be interesting to see if we hear anything more from the town, or as people see this on TV. We can see what we're struggling with. How to get
Absolutely.
this town in line with our few resources, a small town. And
But-
we're trying to get caught up and get the town moving.
Absolutely. But you are, among the leading communities, certainly in my district. So really appreciate all your great work. I'm just looking at everyone here and just really appreciate your activism, and thanks so much for having me tonight. It's been a real honor. And, every time I have these conversations, interactions, I learn more, and also need to ask more. So I've been taking notes, and I'll follow up with you. So, but thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us
Thank you for
tonight.
coming.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a good night, everyone. Hope to see you soon.
Too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.